happy to see you there. And next month, we're actually having Kathy Engworth, who is superintendent of the Binghamton Johnson City Joint Sewage Treatment Plant. She's going to talk about some of the projects and programs that they have going on there. So I guess, oh, and I just want to give a plug too. In October, we have our riverbank cleanup, which we're happy to have any group sign up for that. And you can find more information about that on our website. So I guess we'll get right into things so that we can make sure we get through our entire presentation. I kind of want to just do a little preface just to say, I mean, our goal today isn't really to get into, is drilling right, is drilling wrong, should it be, should the state allow us to go forward, should they not? What we really want to focus on, what Mike, I think, can provide a good perspective on, is what some of the impacts might be, what they've seen in other communities. And so now, regardless of what happens, how can we make sure our community is set up to best handle it, should it come, if and when it does come to Broome County. So I keep that in mind as we go forward. Like I said, the library, we have till 8 o'clock. We want to keep on schedule, so just try to keep that in mind as we go forward. So I guess I'll start off by introducing Mike Lovegreen. He's been with the Bradford County Conservation District since 1981, and he's also worked on the Bradford County Natural Gas Task Force. So he's been actually seeing what he might be expecting to come here, and he's done presentations and tours for the past several years, as the topics come up. So why don't we welcome Mike?
Thanks for having me up. This is actually my second presentation in Broome County. I think I did one in Vestal High School about a year and a half ago or so. I always like to start with this word, perspective. In my 33 years of working with natural resource management and conservation district and public, can you all hear me without the chip? Is that this has been a very controversial issue. I mean, obviously, you'll experience it in the media and the news and all that. And I'm really learning that this is an issue that you've got to learn critical thinking, because everybody spins the information to a certain degree. Our legislators, depending on which side of the aisle they sit on, some of them believe that industry shouldn't be overregulated, and the other ones believe that there should be more environmental protection. We have even our environmental agencies, they want the public to have a sense of confidence, so they present information in a different way. The industry presents information in a different way, and the people that are opposed to drilling present information in different ways. So you really need to practice that critical thinking component in any kind of information you get. Check the facts, check where they're coming from, and I could tell stories all night about how I've seen facts kind of twisted and turned. Bradford County, a little background, 720,000 acres. It's the second largest county in Pennsylvania. Very rural. There's about 62,000 people, and have been for the last 150 years until the gas industry hit, and then we jumped. There's estimates of anywhere from 20 to 20,000 or more people came as a result of that. Our landscape is about 50% of that land is farming and agriculture, and about 48% is woods, and then about 2% of built-up areas. So very, very rural in nature. About 30,000 housing units, which really wound up being a significant part of our impact, socioeconomic impacts, is because we didn't have the housing for all these extra people. I remember people saying that, okay, we're going to have approximately 20,000 new people coming in, and my response is that we don't have enough toilets for that many people. So, again, my perspective and what I'm going to present, so that you can evaluate the information that you're getting from me, is as someone that works in natural resource management. So, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a geologist, I'm a natural resource manager. So a lot of what I'm going to present information on those landscape impacts and some of those impacts that people don't tend to pay much attention to. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the drilling process and the fracking process. If you've got questions on that, we can get to that after my presentation, and I can share some of the information that I've learned over the years. Bradford County is the center, or the largest activity that you see related to Marcellus gas in Pennsylvania. We've got over 2,000 permits issued in our county alone, and that's about 20% of the Marcellus permits that have been issued in Pennsylvania. So we are kind of ground zero. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This is outdated already. I think this is a year or so old. But again, they're finding shale and shale gas all over the country. Every time you pick up a new publication, there seems to be a new play out there. So again, that's starting to impact on what's happening. Each of those plays, and the information that I'm going to present in Bradford County, and we've gone to different places. Our county task force has gone to Texas, we've gone to Colorado, we've gone to New Mexico, we've gone to a lot of places where they had shale plays, just to try to get some anecdotal information from those legislators, those community people, so that we knew what we could expect when they came to Bradford County, or when they started coming to Bradford County. And one of the things we found is that not all information is transferable from one location to the other. So geology plays a big impact on what you can expect. Even within our county of Bradford County, one corner of the county produces a whole lot better gas than other parts of the county. Geology is very much different. Everybody pictures the shale layer as a very uniform layer of shale underneath this, geology and all kinds of things that have happened. There's folds and upheaval and different fractures in that shale. So the gas companies will go where they can get that nice uniform layer, but not everybody's property has that nice uniform layer under it. So again, there's a lot of differences from location to location. And that's something that you need to consider. But again, there's an awful lot of gas. Why they're in Bradford County, these are the pipelines, the transmission lines that run all over the country. Transmission lines are regulated by FERC, by the federal government, and so they, by definition and by law, cannot have an interest in the production, the wells themselves, and the lines that carry the gas from the wells to those transmission lines. And most of them are now, they're carrying the gas to the East Coast, essentially. And you can see where I've got that circled. Bradford County is right there, right where an awful lot of those transmission lines come through, as is Broome County, Tioga County, so southern tier, northern tier of Pennsylvania. They are right in that flow. Taking a little bit closer look, Bradford County again, right around here. That's the Tennessee gas line. Millennium gas line runs, so we're very close to connection. That's one of the reasons why we're kind of a sweet spot for the industry, is that easy access, you don't have to build a lot of infrastructure to get it to those transmission lines to take it to market. And again, that's just kind of for background. Again, this is an older map, and again, one of the reasons why Bradford County is such a sweet spot is because the shale tends to be very thick here, very productive. Been talking with the industry representatives, and right now we're in kind of a lull. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but they're finding record-breaking wells in the northern tier of Pennsylvania. And they said they're never going to get rid of those wells. We might sell everything else off, but we're going to hold on to those. They've got those valves turned way down now because of the price, and like I said, we can talk a little bit more about that. One of the first things that we saw was obviously the wave of leasing, where the landmen came into the county and did an awful lot of leasing. We were very naive, and if there's an area of education that people should get involved in real quick is how to negotiate a good lease. And I know there's some landowner groups in this region that are doing that. Again, when they came into Bradford County, there were an awful lot of landowners, farmers that had traditionally been signing leases for $5 an acre and had helped pay the taxes, but nobody ever really expected that to be developed, since they had been doing that for 50+ years. So when this came along, at first people were kind of giving away the rights, so to speak, and signing the company leases. And then the competition for those leases went up very much in a hurry to about $6,500 an acre. A lot of people that signed those early leases were very disgruntled because they didn't realize they could get that kind of money. So that plays into how some people are a little bitter about gas. And also all those different conditions, those different amendments that you can put into the lease. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but again, you know, we're finding a lot of the things that landowners would have liked to put in there, didn't put in there, and now it's a little bit harder to negotiate with those gas companies. So doing a good lease was very important. After the leasing was done, the companies came out and did a lot of the seismic work, and they would essentially lay a web of sensors through the whole valley for miles and miles. They would set off charges. They would dig holes about 6 feet deep, put some explosives in there, and set off charges so that they could get that resonance from the geology. And so they mapped literally the whole county as far as what was going on. That wasn't too intrusive. I know we did get some complaints from landowners in that you know, they put the holes where they put the charges in places that they didn't expect them to put them in. Again, they didn't follow off. There was people walking all over the countryside laying these wires out. I think one of our municipalities actually took some sport in plowing up the wires when there was snow on the ground. But that aside, I mean, that was a really big operation. But the thing to bear in mind is that the companies have, and it's proprietary information. They didn't share that with the state or local officials or even the landowners. They know what's underneath you, and they know how thick it is, and they have an awful lot of information. So when they're negotiating with you for the leases, you know, they know what they're willing to pay. They know what you have, but you don't. So it's kind of like playing blind poker in a way when you're doing that negotiation. So they know who's got those folds and those fractures in the shale that might not be as productive as others. We have heard comments that from the industry, and whether it's true or not, is that sometimes belonging to a group may or may not benefit you. For example, you may acquire the pool and you're sitting on the sweet spot where the pool is sitting on an area that might be folded or has geology that's not as productive. And so therefore that might pull your price down and you could have negotiated a bigger thing. Like I said, whether that's true or not, that's just some of the things that we were hearing. Some of the things on what to expect, they'll come in and they'll put a well pad in, and that'll be about 2 or 3 weeks of construction to establish that pad. Usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 acres. You've seen them come down in size, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that takes about 3 weeks to drill the hole. And they'll put you know, up to 6, maybe 8 wells on one pad. So that's, you know, one of the things you can expect. What they have done is try and establish those pads and put just one well on each of those pads, because that essentially locks up the leases for that whole production unit. So all the people that are touching on that projected production unit now have their leases essentially locked up until the company decides to abandon that well. So each well will take about 3 weeks to drill, and then they come in, and then it might be immediately afterwards, or it might be, you know, several weeks or even a month afterward. They'll come in with the compressors and they'll do the hydrofracking, and that takes about a week. So you can see 2 or 3 weeks, another 3 weeks, and then another week for hydrofracking. So you got about 2 months of activity or more on each side. A lot of truck traffic during this time. Incredible amounts of trucks back and forth, bringing materials in, equipment in. So, you know, that's something, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Once they get going, it's a 24-hour a day operation, 7 days a week, and they have personnel and crew on site constantly for that time. Again, there's the inconvenience of noise and lights. It's very lit up. In fact, the whole valleys will be lit up. So you'll see a lot of that. There could be corresponding staging areas where they store pipe or materials or that type of thing. Water storage areas, and then roads, there'll be some damage to roads and repair, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and increased quarry activity. When they first started drilling in Bradford County, their laterals were coming out about 600 feet. Well, they're way beyond the 1,200 feet now, so they're actually getting out there about a mile now, so I gotta update this slide. But so those laterals will go as far as a mile. So their production units in the leases, a lot of the older leases said that the production unit that you'll be part of won't be any bigger than 640 acres. Well, now that they're extending those laterals out a lot further, they're trying to amend all those leases to get your production units at least up to 1,200 or more acres. So that's something that's happened. These laterals, at least in Bradford County, are probably about 500, on average, 500 feet apart. And that kind of implies that when they do their hydrofracking, you know, they can frack out, you know, about that distance. So you're seeing these, you know, spaced out, and each one of these is a different well. You can only run one line off of each well. This is an example of production units. Because of the natural fractures in the geology, they're all going in the same direction, that you know, almost northerly to southerly type of direction, and so they're laid out in long, you know, elongated type of production units because those laterals reach out so far. One of the reasons I threw this slide up is because a lot of people will, you know, ask, well, okay, you know, one well pad every 1,200 acres, that's every 2 square miles or so. That's not very dense, but since they're elongated, you might see a well pad, a well pad, a well pad, a well pad, maybe several hundred yards apart or quarter mile apart. So when they run that row of well pads across, you might see a whole lot more increased density than you would expect. And so that's kind of the configuration that we'll see. The early well sites, when they started in Bradford County about 5 or 6 years ago, this was kind of what it looked like. And you'll notice there's 2 reservoirs here. One was for the fresh water, and that fresh water is when they do the hydrofracking, they needed a lot of water all at once, and that needed to be on site and available. And you also had a pit here that the drill cuttings were disposed of. And when they put the line down, they use a fluid then to lubricate both the drill bit as well as that fluid will bring the chips, the rock chips, back up to the surface. It'll go through a machine that actually shakes, removes all those solid materials out, and the liquids then will be recycled back for the drilling process. That would then, you know, the drilling chips, the rock chips, and some excess of that fluid would go into a lined pit in Pennsylvania. They had to have a polyethylene liner in there to hold all that. And then originally Pennsylvania had decided that because, you know, there were probably some heavy minerals in there from deep deposits, as well as, you know, possibly some low-level radioactive material, whatever's coming up from the ground, that needed to be sealed in concrete then, and they sealed it on site. They found out early on that didn't seal it properly, and it started to leach out into some of the surrounding fields. So right now, what they're doing is they're capturing all of that material, they're drying it, they're putting it in bins and taking it to an approved solid waste site. I think even they're bringing some of it up to Chemung County landfill up here, and they were disposing of that material there. In Texas, where they had more benign geology, where they didn't have a lot of the heavy metals and stuff that they were pulling up in Bradford County or Pennsylvania, they were actually land disposing of it. So they take a lot of material and just put it out on the farmers or the landowners' land, and they get away with that. So you don't see this any longer, and you don't see the water reservoir any longer, because what they're doing now, and I'll show you pictures of them, is they're building regional reservoirs. They're probably 5 to 10 acres in size, some of them bigger, some of them smaller, that hold 12 to 20 million gallons of water. And instead of all the trucks coming here depositing that water, they're putting it in these reservoirs, and then they're overland piping that water to the sites. So now they have a central site, they're getting the water from the river or from the major creeks, and they have withdrawal permits from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. but that water then is pumped to the site as they need it for the fracturing process. So they're building these regional reservoirs. The regional reservoirs are serving somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 5-mile radius to all the wells around there. So you can imagine there's quite a few of them on the landscape. This is a site that, again, they're completed, so it kind of gives you a sense of what does that site look like after they're done drilling and all the activities done. And again, just from perspective. Mentioned heavy equipment, intense. We've got access roads that they built. This is a Chesapeake site here. You notice the berm that goes around the pad for control. But again, access is usually an issue that the local municipalities need to deal with, as far as permits, safety, and those type of things. So that's something to consider. I just threw this in. Again, the modern site, you don't see those reservoirs on the site. I spent too much time there. A lot of people mentioned, well, there aren't as many regulations down in Pennsylvania, so I threw this slide in. There are a number of regulations, even though the federal government has exempted oil and gas from their NEPD's permitting process. Pennsylvania did have regulations in place that picked up some of that. So we have an oil and gas act that requires the setbacks. It also sets the guidance for that hole in the ground, the actual drilling of the well. Same with the Oil and Gas Conservation Law. The Dam Safety Encroachments Act regulates any kind of crossing of wetlands or streams. The Solid Waste Management Act provides oversight for that material that leaves the site, those drill cuttings, and anything else that comes off. If there's flowback water that is being transported, that also regulates that. The Clean Streams Law regulates any kind of pollution to waters of the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. Threatened Endangered Species Act for anything that's threatened or endangered, and our DOT people as far as access off the highways. One of the points, the take-home points, is that we have different regulations. We have different people that oversee those different regulations. So, one of the learning points is that they're not always well coordinated, and by not having a centralized oversight, you have a different branch of our Department of Environmental Protection that might regulate the hole in the ground, another branch that takes a look at the Dam Safety Encroachments Act, another one that does the solid waste. So that's been a challenge for our regulatory agencies is again keeping coordinated for that site. So again, just something to think about. 2006, 2007, like I said, this happened really fast. You see Bradford County, only 8 permits in 2006, only 11 in 2007, and then we became the Center for Marcellus. Here's that history from 2008 to just January 2012. So there's a year's more worth of permits on there, but you can see that quick. Once they decided that this was a good spot to drill, they pulled out all the plugs, and so we became that center of drilling for a long time. I often hear from legislators and regulators, boy, we never expected it to come this quick and to happen that fast. And I often, kind of wonder why that is, because this isn't unique. I mean, when we started looking around, we went to Texas, like I said, and Colorado and some other places. And this is a typical curve. So once they mobilize and they come in quite rapidly. And again, you're kind of inundated with people and equipment. And so, again, it shouldn't be unexpected. There's been enough of these type of operations around that you can learn. This is a map of the overall gas activity in Bradford County. And again, it's probably a little dated, it might be a year old now, but it gives you a sense of, boy, there isn't hardly a corner in Bradford County that hasn't been touched by some type of activity. And that's a mixture of different things. I've got that broken down. This is some very hospitable land, it's very steep slopes, and it's mostly state game land, so that's why we have kind of a void of activity right in this area here. It's pretty much touched every one of our municipalities in some way. This is, again, it's a little bit dated, but this is all the different gas companies. At one point we had, I think it counted about 24 different companies that had a lease or permit in Bradford County. That started to consolidate. What happened is an awful, like I said, the landmen came in and everybody was buying up leases. The companies were buying up leases. There were middlemen companies that would go out and buy up leases and then sell that collective package of leases to one of the gas companies. So we had, an awful lot of heavy sales going on. A lot of it was pressure sales too. I was talking to one group and somebody suggested, boy, what they want to do is provide a licensing and registration for people that negotiate leases or sell leases, just to ensure quality and ethics. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about high pressure sales that was being done. But once all those leases, once we got to about 80% of Bradford County being leased, the companies then literally went into a room, closed the doors, and swapped leases. And the reason for that is that they needed to consolidate their holdings so that you see one company, each one of these symbols and colors is a different company. They can consolidate their company so that they can then put their infrastructure in their collection lines, their pipelines. Again, it was to their benefit to do that. When we went to different states to look at what happened is you have a lot of different companies that are the exploration or development companies. Those are the ones that buy the leases, they go out and they establish the wells, they establish production records so that they then help establish the value of those gas holdings. And then they usually wind up selling those holdings to another company. And slowly but surely you get hard down to maybe one or two companies. You may have leased to one specific company, but there's no guarantee that you'll ever have that company drill that well on your property. It might be somebody totally different. And there's a lot of consolidation going on. We're starting to see that in Bradford County. We're down to maybe four or so main companies now for all these ones that initially started. But again, that's you can just see how they did that. They consolidated their holdings, they swapped leases, and they're still doing that as I'm standing here talking. And again, you can see how that wound up. This is a water resources map. Each one of these little symbols here is one of those reservoirs that I talked about. That's the reservoir that holds the water that serves a region. I've got some statistics on how many of those. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think 120 of them now. And then these are the water lines that connect some of them. These are the gas lines. We're up there somewhere about 800 miles of gas lines in Bradford County, and that just connects all those wells. This is that major Tennessee gas line, the transmission line. I think I was at a meeting when they talked about 1.2 billion cubic feet a day through a 24-inch line that flowed through Bradford County through that line. And that line takes gas as far away as the Gulf of Mexico up from here. They're building, as we speak, they're finishing up a parallel line to that. It's a 30-inch line, so they expect an awful lot of gas coming from Marcellus and others to make that kind of investment. But again, these are the gas lines. This is, again, a year old, so we've got quite a few more in process. Where are they getting their water? Susquehanna River, a lot of our bigger streams. The Susquehanna River Basin Commission regulates that. When they first started drilling in Bradford County in Pennsylvania, the gas companies weren't getting permits for water withdrawals. It's a consumptive use, and the Susquehanna River Basin Commission asks for a permit when you have, I believe it's over 20,000 gallons, is that right, Chip? Yeah, 20,000 gallons a day consumptive use. So the gas companies didn't get permits and they were taking that water. The Susquehanna River Basin Commission finally caught up to them and they negotiated a penalty as well as an agreement that the gas industry, if they use gallon one, needs to have a consumptive permit from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. So for each one of these withdrawal sites, the Basin Commission does an evaluation. What are the impacts on the aquatic life? What's the impacts on upstream and downstream users, water quality, etc. And they monitor that pretty rigorously. rigorously. Each one of those withdrawal sites has a meter on it. Most of the sites were somewhere between 1 million and 2 million gallons a day is what they can withdraw. And they did open an office, they being the Susquehanna River Basin Commission in our county, so they have 3 people that just go around at night and weekends, holidays, just making sure that there's compliance with those different sites. We have about 40 sites in our county now where they're withdrawing water. Each company tends to develop their own sites. They do a little bit of sharing, but not much. So you can see they develop a site. It might be several acres in size. This is the Susquehanna River that goes under this bridge. They'll pipe the water to a number of pumps that they can hook up to, or hydrants. When they first came to Bradford County, they were, again, when they were in negotiations with the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, and they had halted their activities until they could get the permitting straight. Several of the companies went to a lot of our public water supplies. They had permits. So, for example, Towanda had a permit for 1 million gallons a day to serve their public. They're only using about 100,000 gallons of that water to actually provide public water. So they had 900,000 gallons a day to sell to the gas companies. So there are several of our community water supplies that, and, you know, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not going to make a judgment on it. But they did, you know, and some of them still are selling water to the gas companies, and so they actually hook up to the public hydrants and take that water. This is, again, these are all the different water sites in Bradford County that have been permitted. Other water issues, you know, erosion sedimentation control is something. What Pennsylvania did is they issued a special permit just for the gas industry. We, the conservation districts in Pennsylvania, were delegated authority to review and approve those plans. But early on, the industry negotiated with Pennsylvania that they were going to take that delegation away from us at the local level, and so they were just doing it at the state level. So now the state issues all those permits. And again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. What the state decided to do was issue expedited permits to the industry. And what that means is if the industry has one of their engineers stamp their plans, it doesn't get an environmental review. So it just goes through the system for the erosion sedimentation portion. So again, just kind of something to share. You can have the best regulations in the world, but it depends on how you're going to administer it. Water management plans. Every site, before they can drill a well, needs to have a water management plan. And essentially what that is how do you track the water from cradle to grave? Where's the water coming from through the well? How much is being utilized? Where does the wastewater that comes back up, where does that go, and how is it disposed of? And so they can't drill without that water management plan. We hear different estimates depending on how deep the well is and how far that lateral is, that somewhere between, you know, maybe 2, 4, even 6 million gallons is utilized. That water goes down into the well with the mixture that they put into it. They fracture, and then somewhere around 30% of it comes back up as production water. What the industries used to do is that they used to tank that up and then take it to a disposal site. What the Susquehanna River Basin Commission tells me now is that about 80% of that is being recycled. So they're using that water instead of the high disposal costs, they're bringing it to a tank farm, and you'll see a number of tankers lined up, and they'll run that water through the different tankers and filter out all the solids, put it back in other tankers, take it to the next site, blend it with fresh water so that they get the right consistency that they want, and put it down the next well. So that's what they're doing to avoid some of those disposal issues, and so they're doing a lot of that water recycling within the county itself. Let's see what else. Well, I guess that's. I threw this in. Floodplain regulations is something that our local municipalities deal with, and being in a rural area, some of the capabilities of the local municipalities probably aren't as great as they should be, because again, a lot of these well sites that are in floodplains are regulated. I mean, you know, they have hazardous materials. You can imagine this happened with a flood in Bradford County, and so these could float downstream. They could block your bridges. Any stored material that isn't elevated and above those flood elevations could also get into the water system. So again, that's usually a local issue. Those floodplain regulations need to be enforced, especially during that drilling process and fracturing process. This is another local municipal thing that people don't often think about. We have setback regulations for the well itself. It's actually taken in Texas, but it works. There's the well right there. Now, regulations in most states say that you have to have a certain setback. I believe in Pennsylvania it's 200 feet from any residence, unless the residents sign off on that and waive it. But what we don't usually have is corresponding local regulations that say you can't build your house within X number of feet of the well. And what happened here is, okay, they had setbacks, they drilled the well, and then someone came along and built their house next to where the well was. Well, if they have to come back and re-drill or refract, then basically this house is kind of toast. So that's something to think about. There should be some kind of local regulations, building regulations that assure that any new building stays further away, so it needs to be a two-way street. Get into really what I wanted to talk about is those impacts on the landscape, and that, lots and lots of different things are occurring. Every time I turn around, there's another kind of subtle impact on the community and the landscape that you just don't think about. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. If you're looking at just this picture here, well, here's a well pad here. You can just barely catch it. There's a water intake there. There's another well pad up here. And then I couldn't get it in the picture, but there's a quarry right there. All of those are serving the industry that's all on one farm. So you see those landscape impacts all over the place. This is an example if you want to get an idea of the density. This is a well pad, well pad, well pad, well pad. There's another pad, and then there's a quarry going on here. So those are all kind of landscape impacts that we don't often associate other than the well pads. You have the drill site and the access roads for each one of these. So if we're looking at around 2,000 permits right now with about one well on each one of those, we can assume that there's probably about 2,000 well pads out there. Each one of them has maybe a short access road, it could be a quarter-mile access road or longer to get back to that wherever it is that they're drilling. This is I actually got on site during a hydrofracking operation. You don't usually get on those sites, but I was with the secretary of our DEP, and so we got access to the site. The reason for putting that up is that each one of these sites during the fracturing process, it is an industrial operation. So it's like having a factory for a month or two in place. And the next slide, yeah, this was from a Penn State professor. That you've got just about 6,000 pipe connections in that small portable factory that's operating on that 5-acre field. And 500 of those are very high pressure joints. And his point was that stuff's going to happen. Like any factory or any industrial use, you're going to have pipes that are bursting, you're going to have spillage, and you're going to have things like that. The key is to having proper controls in place. I think I mentioned when they built their sites, they had a 4-foot berm all around the site, and it's underlined by polyethylene, the collection system, and then there's they put heavy mats to drive on so that they don't puncture that polyethylene. So they have a control system in place. Some sites, some companies that I've been on the site for might have just one of those control tubes, just a polyethylene tube that's filled with material as their controls. So that's something to think about is the placement of that. And why I mentioned the difference in the different companies. There are differences in how each of them do their operations. So it's really difficult for me to paint a picture of the whole industry. Just like any industry, you have very conscientious players and you have some that might not be so conscientious. But the point of this is that they are industrial operations, and so stuff happens. Pipelines, I mentioned all the pipelines. A lot of the companies will bore under the streams or under the roads so that there's no disturbance to roads. and so we're seeing a lot of directional boring. That's created another byproduct, because when they bore under a stream, they over-excavate the hole, they slide the pipe through, and then they kind of cement that with a clay type of mixture. And so when that clay mixture kind of pops out both ends of that bore hole, they suck it all up and vacuum it, and they essentially look for places as a soil amendment to bring that. So that's a byproduct. I know a lot of our farmers are being asked, would you be willing to accept that to put on your field? There doesn't seem to be any regulations that prevent that, and it's really a clay product, so there are, other than some rock chips that came from under the stream, but what it does is it adds clay to soils that we have that are already pretty clay soils, so it doesn't help their drainage a whole heck of a lot. But we have a lot of these smaller pipelines that are going between the different pipes. Quarries is that was a sleeper that just, we kind of ran into after about 2 years into the process. All those little mom and pop operations that did some crushed stone or whatever got bought up by bigger companies. Incredible amounts of material that they need. When you think 2,000 pads, 5-acre pads, they're all rocked. The access roads were all rocked. All the roads that are being rebuilt, and I'll talk a little bit about those, are calling for materials. So we've seen, there was a point there where just about every month I was seeing a new permit come across my desk that the state was issuing for another quarry. And so we have a lot of quarries around the landscape. It had a couple of side effects. One is that since the gas companies weren't asking for real high spec materials like our DOT people and our municipalities would need, the material was going to the gas companies, and plus they were paying a lot better prices for it. So it drove the price of stone up. So the people that might have wanted material for their roads that needed to be spec'd, the DOT people for the state, and even contractors that were doing driveways and stuff, were paying a lot more for that material, and so that caused a spike in that. Plus, again, everybody that had a mom and pop operation, because they had the permits already in hand, the bigger companies, the bigger quarry companies came into the county and started to buy them up, mostly because they had permits, and so they didn't have to wait for that process. I mean, this is an example. That used to be a small mom and pop quarry operation. We have dozens of these now on the landscape that we didn't expect before, just to provide that material to feed the industry. Overland pipes, hundreds of miles of overland pipes. If you remember, I talked about those reservoirs where we need to carry the water from the reservoirs to the well sites. So typically, they'll cut or clear a path through the woods, and there's a stream right in here, so there's stream crossings that they do. And you'll see those pipes all across the landscape carrying the water to the different well sites. They'll lay them down, they'll take them to a well site, they'll utilize them for however long it takes to do the fracturing, and then they'll move them to another site. If they're going to do multiple wells in the neighborhood, that might be there for quite a while. Some of our municipalities have allowed them to lay that also in the right-of-ways of the roads. Underground pipes, and miles and miles. That width, that right-of-way width, could be anywhere from 75 feet to 150 feet. And that's because you have the trench itself, you have the topsoil that's stockpiled, you have a road that goes through there, so again, they're going to vary in width. That's usually a separate negotiation with the landowners for a lease to put pipelines. So those pipelines, they kind of vary on who's going to sign the lease and who's not going to sign the lease. So again, miles and miles of that going on. And while on this, that was another side effect that we never expected. I also sit on our regional hardwood council, and you would think with 4, 5, 6, 700, 800 miles of pipelines going in, there's an awful lot of high quality timber that should be going to mills. Well, all the timber mill operators were complaining that they were starving for material, and so we were wondering, okay, where's all this material going with all this timber being cut down for pipelines? you know, typically what happened is that the companies, the gas companies, or the pipeline companies would go in and negotiate for the right of way, and then they would have a forester, and the forester would negotiate the value of that timber. And in some cases it would be, okay, here's what the timber is right now, so here's that damage value for that timber. If somebody was sharp, they would say, wait a minute, you know, when I cut this timber 20 years from now, it'll have a different value. But they would negotiate the value for that timber. Usually it would be the damage value of cutting it down at existing values. Landowner is already kind of feeling usually a little snookered. Excuse me. So they would generally say, no, we'll keep the wood, and then we'll market it after you're done with your pipeline. Well, since the company had no interest in that timber, typically what they do is they pile that lumber up in a big jumbled pile of all kinds of stuff, you know, roots, the brush, everything. So when the landowner went to market that material, the mill would come in and say, I have no idea what's in that pile. You know, and you have the 30-foot tall pile of twisted trees, and so they didn't harvest those trees in a way that would make maximum quality for veneer logs or saw logs or firewood or whatever. It wasn't sorted; it was just pushed aside. So you know, eventually that landowner, you know, get an offer from the mills. In fact, when half of it might have been worth it, it would have been done properly. And so they say, no, sorry, you know, just keep trying to market it. And after a while, it's been a year or 2 years, and now the trees aren't worth anything at all. So the trees weren't making it to the mills. And so we did an awful lot of education with forest landowners to make them realize that here are the options that you need to negotiate with the people who are doing the pipelines. The other thing we found out that the pipeline companies were doing too is that if you did sell your trees to the pipeline company and settle for the damages, the people that were doing the clearing, they would be being paid by the clearance. So suppose someone offered you, you know, okay, I'm going to clear your right of way for $10,000. Any value that you got from that forestry product would be deducted from your payment to clear that right of way. So there was no incentive to sort those logs out for highest quality or for the best use of those logs. And so, you know, it took us quite a while to start to negotiate and make them realize that, you know, this was a high-value product that wasn't getting to our mills. So we had that side economic impact as a result of again, the logs not getting to the mills where they were supposed to be. And we still have a lot of those jumbled up piles that it's valuable material, but nobody knows what's in those piles. So it's something to think about. These are those water impoundments I talked about. They usually sit on top of the hill so that you have gravity flow down to where the well pads are. They're polyethylene lined, and they're filled by trucks that go to the water intakes by the river or the streams. So you traded off a lot of truck traffic going to each individual well site to a lot of truck traffic that is constantly going to these water impoundment sites. Landowners will sign separate agreements to locate these on their farms or their property. Somewhere around $20,000 or $30,000 for a 5-year lease to put that on there with an automatic renewal. If the company wants to keep it there, they can keep it there. I'm not sure what that automatic renewal value is going to be, but again, one of the trade-offs is again that constant truck traffic to fill these. This is an example of one of the larger ones, so you can see the perspective. Here's a farm here. That's a pretty big impoundment. A lot of pipe and supply yards popped up all around the county. And again, that's a local municipal issue. You know, and we have very few building codes or issues or permits. Again, it's a rural area, so these are, you know, say zoning in Bradford County, you get run out of town. So these pop up, these could pop up right next to your home. So that's something to think about also, is where do you allow those pipe yards, supply yards. You know, they may be a couple acres in size, or they may be 10, 15 acres in size. So we're seeing, you know, lows on the landscape all over. So there's centralized places where the pipes are. Housing, as I mentioned, was a real issue, and so we're seeing, you know, a lot of campers that are kind of quasi-permanent now, being situated all around in people's backyards for that housing. The water intakes is a landscape impact, as I mentioned before. Again, these are places where the hydrants are, where the trucks can line up and come. Truck traffic, again, major issue. This is from Texas, similar type of development, but you can see that some days they had 300 trucks a day access a well site. So very significant truck traffic. And when they first came, I was sharing before the presentation, I went to a couple of the companies with a presentation on our roads. We do a dirt and gravel roads program in Bradford County. And wanted to talk about our soils. We have clay soils. Our local roads were never engineered and designed. They kind of evolved from the old wagon trails. And so they break up in the spring just the pickup traffic. Well, when a company starts their operation on a pad, it's like I said, 24/7. They don't close down for anything. So when roads started to break up like this, and when I told them about this type of occurrence, they said, "Well, thanks, we really appreciate it, but we know how to build roads." They didn't really experience North Country roads until they got to our town. I think the first year, we had a hard frost that started early in the year and went through the whole year, so they got away really well. And they didn't get that freeze-thaw cycle that we had. Well, the second year, it really hit home hard, and they were pulling their trucks through with bulldozers just because they can't stop. As a result, and this is a state route that broke up. These are typical how they would start to break up, especially along the berms, and they're carrying incredible loads. And all this happened in one day. This is not far from our office, and I just documented that. The companies then started a very proactive program and started to rebuild all our roads. So there's roughly 1,500 miles of dirt and gravel roads that our local municipalities operate and own in Bradford County. And they'll go in and they'll till them up, they'll inject a cement mixture in that, and they were actually rebuilding our